The tracks in the snow shouldn't have been there. Willa Glenn had checked the perimeter 3 times that morning, and the land around her cabin was empty. Untouched, white stretched for miles. But now, as the blizzard began to devour the horizon, those tracks appeared. Small, uneven, leading straight toward the frozen creek where nothing survived. She knew the rules of this territory. When a storm like this rolled in, everything alive either found shelter or died. Whatever made those tracks had maybe an hour before the cold finished what it started. The wind screamed through the pines, erasing the trail even as she stared at it. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness, a sound that made her blood freeze colder than the air around her. Willa had been alone for 3 years. Ever since the town of Ashford Ridge decided she was a traitor, she'd spoken up when settlers attacked a native camp without cause, burned their supplies in the dead of winter, left families to starve. For that, they called her a sympathizer. For that, they'd driven her out. Now she lived in a cabin her father built before he died, miles from anyone, in a slice of land nobody wanted, too close to, tribal territory for settlers, too exposed for the natives. The isolation was her punishment and her protection. She'd learned to prefer the silence. But today, silence was breaking. She grabbed her heavy coat, the one lined with wolf fur, and pushed out into the wind. The cold hit like a fist. Snow whipped sideways, cutting visibility to almost nothing. She followed the tracks, her boots crunching through the crust of ice, each step harder than the last. The temperature was dropping fast. Her breath came out in violent clouds. She should turn back. Every instinct told her to return to fire, bolt the door, wait out the storm. But those tracks were too small, too desperate. 10 minutes into the white void, she found them. 2 girls native huddled against a fallen tree trunk, half buried in snow. Their skin had turned the color of ash. Ice clung to their hair. Neither of them was moving. For one terrible moment, Willa thought she was too late. Then one of them coughed, a weak, rattling sound that barely carried over the wind. Willa dropped to her knees. Her hands moved fast, brushing snow off their faces, checking for breathing. Both alive, barely. Their lips were blue, eyes half closed. Hypothermia. Advanced. If she didn't get them inside within minutes, they'd slip away. She looked around, scanning for anyone else. No one. These girls were alone, lost, abandoned by the storm. Willa knew what bringing them back meant. She knew the risk. If the tribe found out a white woman had 2 of their children, they'd assume the worst. They'd come for blood. But if she left them here, she'd be no better than the people who drove her out of Ashford Ridge. She lifted the first girl, lighter than expected, fragile as kindling, then the second. Both were unconscious now. Willa turned back toward the cabin. Every step a battle against the wind. Her arms burned. Her lungs screamed. The cold clawed through her coat. She kept walking. By the time she kicked open her cabin door, her hands were numb. She laid the girls on the floor near the fire, peeling away their frozen clothing with shaking fingers. Their skin was ice. She wrapped them in every blanket she owned, layered them close to the heat. One of the girls stirred, whimpering. The other stayed, silent. Willa knelt beside them, pressing her ear to the smaller one's chest. A heartbeat, faint, slow, but there she exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and terror. Outside, the blizzard sealed the world shut. Inside, Willa stared at the 2 children she'd just saved and wondered if she'd also just signed her own death sentence. The smaller girl woke first, and when her eyes opened, terror flooded them. She tried to scream, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Her body jerked away from Willa, scrambling backward until she hit the wall. The older girl stirred at the commotion, eyes snapping open. With the same wild fear, Willa raised her hands slowly, palms out. She kept her distance, crouched low to appear less threatening. The girls were trapped between the fire and a stranger, and every instinct told them this white woman was dangerous. Willa had seen that look before, in the eyes of a cornered animal, in the faces of people who'd learned that survival meant never trusting anyone. She spoke softly words they wouldn't understand, but a tone they might. The older girl positioned herself in front of the younger one, protective despite barely being able to sit upright. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for weapons, exits, anything useful. Willa noticed the older girl's hand trembling, not just from cold, but from exhaustion and fear. The blizzard hammered against the walls. Snow pressed against the windows until the glass groaned. The world outside had become a white void, impenetrable and deadly. Even if the girls wanted to run, there was nowhere to go. The storm had made prisoners of them all. Willa stood slowly, keeping her movements predictable. She walked to the stove and ladled hot broth into 2 wooden bowls. The smell of meat and herbs filled the cabin. She saw the younger girl's nose twitch, saw hunger, war with fear in her expression. Willis set the bowls on the floor between them and retreated to the far side of the room. Minutes passed. The older girl whispered something to the younger one in their language. The younger girl shook her head, but her eyes never left the bowls. Finally, the older girl reached out, grabbed both bowls, and pulled them back. She took a small sip. First, testing. When nothing happened, she handed one to her sister, and they both drank fast and desperate. Willow watched them, her chest tight, with something she hadn't felt in years. They reminded her of Emma, her daughter, dead 3 winters now, taken by fever when the town doctor refused to come because Willa had defended the natives. She'd held Emma through 3 days of burning skin and rattling breath. And when it ended, something in Willa had ended too. These girls were alive because Willa found them. Emma was dead because no one came. The older girl finished her broth and set the bowl down, eyes fixed on Willa with sharp intelligence. She said something, a question maybe, or a demand. Willa shook. Her head pointed to herself. Willa, she said clearly. The girl stared. Then, slowly she pointed to herself. Kimya. She pointed to the younger girl. Winona. The first exchange. The first threat of something that wasn't fear. But outside, the storm raged on. And Willa knew that when it finally stopped, when the snow settled and the sky cleared, people would come looking. The tribe would send warriors to find their missing children. And when those warriors arrived at a white woman's cabin and found 2 native girls inside, there would be no time for explanations. Willa pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders and fed more wood into the fire. The girls watched every move, their bodies tense and ready. The cabin felt smaller than it had in years, crowded with tension and unspoken questions. The younger girl, Winona, coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Willa's stomach drop. The girl's breathing had changed, become labored. Willa moved closer, and this time, Kimla didn't stop her. She pressed her palm against Winona's forehead and felt the heat radiating beneath her skin. Fever. The hypothermia had stressed Winona's body too much. Now, infection or pneumonia was setting in. Willa had herbs, had remedies her mother taught her, but nothing guaranteed. And if this child died under her roof, the tribe wouldn't just come with questions. They'd come with fire. Winona's fever climbed through the night. Her small body shook despite the layers of blankets, and her breath came in sharp, painful gasps. Will crushed willow bark and mixed it with warm water, coaxing the girl to drink. Kimala held her sister's hand, whispering words that sounded like prayers, though Willa knew better than to call them that. They were something else. Words of comfort, of family, of survival. The older girl watched Willa's every movement with fierce attention. When Willa brought cold cloths to press against Winona's burning skin, Kimla studied the technique. When Willa prepared a pus of sage and honey for the girl's chest, Kimla leaned forward to see how it was made. She was learning, calculating, deciding whether this white woman was truly trying to help or playing some longer, crueler game. By dawn, the fever broke. Winona's breathing eased, her skin cooled, and she fell into a deep, healing sleep. Kimya's shoulders finally dropped, tension draining from her frame. She looked at Willa with something new in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the Beginning of acknowledgement. Willa stood and walked to the window. The blizzard had weakened during the night. Snow still fell, but softer now, almost gentle. Within hours, maybe a day, the storm would pass completely. The world would become navigable again. And that's when they would come. She turned back to find Kimmy watching her with that sharp, knowing gaze. The girl understood, too. She could read the change in weather, knew what it meant. Her people would be searching. They'd track their daughter's path to this cabin. And when they arrived, Kimmy Mela would have to explain why she was here, why a white woman had them, why they hadn't tried to escape. Willa sat down, across from her, separated by the sleeping form of Winona. She pointed to the door, then to Kimela, then made a walking motion with her fingers. The message was clear. You can leave whenever you want. Kimela's jaw tightened. She looked at her sister, then back at Willa. She shook her head firmly and wrapped her arms around Winona's blanket-covered form. The meaning was equally clear. Not without her. Not until she's strong enough. 3 more days passed. The storm faded to occasional flurries, then stopped entirely. Sunlight broke through the clouds, harsh and brilliant against the endless white. Winona grew stronger, able to sit up and take food on her own. The cabin settled into a strange rhythm. Willa cooking and maintaining the fire. The girls recovering and watching, all of them aware that time was running out. On the 4th morning, Kimmy Mela spoke. She pointed to Winona, then to Willa, then placed her hand over her heart. The gesture was unmistakable. Gratitude, recognition of debt. Then she pointed outside toward the direction they'd come from. She made a walking gesture and held up fingers. 2 days, maybe 3. That's how long before the search party reached this area. Willa nodded. She'd expected as much. What she hadn't expected was Kimmy Mela's next gesture. The girl pointed to herself, then to Winona, then drew a line in the air. Between them and Willa, she brought her palms together, fingers interlaced. Connected bound. Willa felt something crack in her chest. A wall she'd built. After Emma died. After Ashford Ridge cast her out. After she decided that being alone was safer than caring. This girl was promising something. Protection maybe, or testimony. A witness to the truth when the warriors came. But would it be enough? Willa reached under her bed and pulled out her father's old rifle. She checked the ammunition, counted the rounds, enough to defend herself if it came to that. Though she knew that if the tribe decided she was an enemy, no amount of bullets would save her. Kimla's eyes widened at the sight of the weapon. She stood quickly, positioning herself between Willa and Winona. Her hands came up in a stopping motion, her expression fierce. Willa realized her mistake. She quickly set the rifle down, shook her head, and made a gesture of putting it away. Not for you, for protection, for all of us. Kimela's stance softened, but doubt clouded her features. She'd seen what guns meant in white hands. She'd probably lost people to them. The tension in the cabin thickened, fragile trust suddenly on the edge of breaking. Willa knew she'd made a critical error, but she also knew the reality. When the tribe arrived, she'd have seconds to prove she wasn't a threat, and she had no idea if those seconds would be enough, or if Kimla's word would carry any weight at all. Outside, the snow began to melt, creating pathways through the wilderness, creating roads that led straight to Willa's door. The days took on a rhythm that felt both natural and impossible. Will taught them words. Fire, water, food, safe. Kimela repeated each one carefully. Her pronunciation improving with surprising speed. She taught Willa words in return. Sounds that felt strange in Willa's mouth, but carried weight she could feel even without full understanding. Winona recovered more each day. Color returned to her cheeks. She began to smile, cautiously at first, then with more freedom. She was younger, more willing to let go of fear. She showed Willa how. Her people braided their hair, small fingers working through the pattern with practiced ease. Willa let the girl practice on her own hair, feeling the gentle tugs, and knowing this was trust being built one strand at a time. But Kimla never fully relaxed. Her eyes constantly tracked the windows, the door, the spaces between shadows. She was waiting, counting days. Willa recognized that vigilance because she carried it too. The awareness that peace was always temporary, that violence could arrive without warning. On the sixth day, Willa took them outside. The sun was bright, the air cold, but bearable. The endless white stretched in all directions, broken only by clusters of pine trees standing like dark sentinels. Winona laughed at the sight of a rabbit darting between drifts, the sound clear and bright. Kimya didn't laugh, but something in her expression softened. Willa showed them her small corral where she kept two horses, both restless from days trapped in a shelter. She demonstrated how she fed them, how she checked their hooves for ice. Kimla approached the animals with confidence, running her hand along the mare's flank with the ease of someone who'd grown up around horses. She spoke to the animal in her language, and the horse's ears swiveled toward her voice, responding to the calm authority there. That's when Willa understood something crucial. These girls weren't from some distant camp. They came from a tribe that lived close enough to know this land, to travel through it regularly. Their people were horsemen, hunters. They would have excellent trackers, men, who could read the land like Willa read her father's old books, which meant they already knew where the girls were. They were coming. The only question was when. That night, Willa lay awake listening to the girls breathe in the darkness. They slept close to each other. Kimmy Mela's arm draped protectively over her sister. The fire crackled softly. The wind had died completely, leaving the world in an eerie silence that felt more threatening than any storm. She thought about Emma, about the promises she'd made when her daughter was born, to protect her, to give her a better life than Willa had known, to teach her to stand up for what was right, even when it cost everything. She'd kept those promises until the town decided that standing up made her an enemy, and then keeping those promises had killed her daughter. These girls weren't Emma. Saving them wouldn't bring her daughter back, but walking away from them would have made Emma's death meaningless, would have proven that the town was right to cast her out. That compassion was weakness, that caring about anyone outside your own people was a mistake worth punishing. Willa had saved Kimmy Mela and Winona because it was the only choice that let her live with herself. Now she'd face whatever consequences came from that choice. The next morning, Kimmy Mela woke before dawn. She stood at the window, staring east toward the rising sun. Willa joined her there, two women standing in silence, both knowing what the clear skies meant. Kimya turned to her and spoke carefully in the English words she'd learned. "They come soon." Willa nodded. "I know you." Kimla struggled for the right words. She placed her hand over her heart again, then pointed to Willa. "Good. You good?" It was the simplest statement, but it carried the weight of a promise, a testimony. When the tribe arrived, Kimmy would speak for her. But would it matter? Would the word of a child outweigh the sight of two native girls in a white woman's cabin? Kima seemed to read her doubt. She gripped Willa's arm with surprising strength, her young face fierce with determination. She said something in her own language, words that flowed like water over stone. And though Willa didn't understand them, she heard the conviction there. Then Winona appeared beside them, taking Willa's other hand. The younger girl looked up with eyes that held no more fear, only a pure, uncomplicated gratitude. Outside in the distance, Willa saw something that made her breath catch. Smoke rising thin and gray against the morning sky. A signal fire. They were here. The tribe had found them. The smoke meant they were close. Maybe a mile, maybe less. Willa's hand wanted to shake, but she forced them steady. Kimmy Mela watched her closely, reading every micro-expression, every shift in posture. The girl was preparing, too, in her own way. Willa made a decision. She walked to where she'd hidden the rifle and deliberately carried it outside. She set it against the exterior wall of the cabin in plain view, but far from her reach. A gesture, a statement. She was armed, but choosing not to hold the weapon. Choosing vulnerability over threat. Kima nodded, once sharp and approving. She understood what Willow was doing, creating the right image before the Warriors arrived. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, figures appeared on the horizon. 4 of them, riding horses, moving with the easy confidence of men who knew this land belonged to them. They approached at a steady pace, not rushing, not hesitating, deliberate. Willa stepped out to meet them, her hands visible and empty. Kimla and Winona came out behind her. The younger girl moved to run toward the riders, but Kimla caught her shoulder, held her back. Not yet. Let them come to us. The lead rider was older, his face weathered and hard. He wore his authority like a second skin. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. His eyes locked onto Willow with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. Behind him, the 3 younger warriors spread out slightly, a tactical formation that could surround her in seconds if needed. The leader spoke, his voice deep and carrying an unmistakable edge of controlled anger. Willa didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. He wanted answers now. Kimya stepped forward and began, speaking rapidly in her language. She gestured to Winona, to Willa, to the cabin behind them. Her voice was steady, forceful, making a case. The leader's eyes never left Willa's face while his daughter spoke, searching for any sign of deception or threat. One of the younger warriors interrupted, his tone sharp and accusatory. He pointed at Willa, then made a grabbing motion. The implication was obvious. She'd taken the girls, kidnapped them. Kimla's voice rose, fierce and insistent. She said something that made the warrior fall silent. Then she walked to Willa, took her hand, and placed it over her own heart. The gesture from before, but now performed in front of her people. A public declaration. Winona broke free and ran to the leader, throwing her arms around him. He caught her, his hard expression finally cracking as he held his daughter close. He spoke to her quietly, checking her over for injuries, his hands gentle despite their strength. Winona spoke rapidly, pointing back at Willa, her words tumbling over each other. The leader set Winona down carefully and dismounted. He walked toward Willa with slow, measured steps. Every muscle in Willa's body wanted to retreat, to create distance, but she held her ground. Running now would confirm guilt. Standing might confirm courage or foolishness. She wasn't sure which. He stopped 3 feet away, studying her with eyes that missed nothing. He saw the rifle leaning against the wall, saw her empty hands, saw the exhaustion in her face, the supplies she'd clearly shared, the blankets the girls were wrapped in. He looked back at his daughters, both healthy and unharmed. He spoke a single word, a question. Kimla answered, pointing to the frozen creek, to the direction they'd come from. She acted out the story, being lost, the cold, Willa finding them, bringing them inside, fighting the fever. The leader's jaw tightened. He looked at Willa again, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite trust, but recognition, acknowledgement of debt. He turned to one of the younger warriors and spoke sharply. The warrior looked surprised, almost offended. But after a moment of tense silence, he nodded. The leader turned back to Willa and spoke in broken English, each word carefully chosen. You save, you keep safe. Will nodded. Slowly. They would have died. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he placed his right hand over his heart. The same gesture his daughters had used. I see you. I remember. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't friendship, but it was recognition. In his culture, in his world, this meant something. A debt acknowledged. A promise made. He returned to his horse and lifted Winona onto it. Kimmel approached Willa one last time. She pressed something into Willa's hand, a small carved stone, smooth and warm from being carried. A token, a reminder. Then she mounted behind her father, and a group turned to leave. Willa watched them go, the carved stone heavy in her palm, wondering if she'd ever see them again, wondering if this debt would truly be remembered, or if the moment the tribe disappeared over the horizon, she'd become just another white woman in a cabin, alone and forgotten. The leader looked back once, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. Then they were gone, swallowed by the white landscape. Willa stood there long after they had vanished. The stone clutched tight, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over her like snow. She'd survived the encounter, but something told her this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something larger, something she couldn't yet see the shape of. 3 weeks passed. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. Willa fell back into her solitary routines, tending the horses, repairing winter damage to the cabin, checking her supplies. But something had changed. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, but waiting, expectant. She kept the carved stone Kimmy had given her on the table where she could see it. Some mornings she'd wake and reach for it first thing, tracing the smooth surface with her thumb, wondering if the girls were safe, if they remembered her, if the leader's words meant anything at all. The answer came on a morning when frost still clung to the grass. Willow was carrying water from the creek when she heard horses, multiple riders. Her stomach dropped. She set the buckets down carefully and turned to face whoever was coming. 6 riders emerged from the treant. The leader from before sat at the front, his posture regal despite the simple clothing. But this time he wasn't alone. An older woman rode beside him, her face lined with age and wisdom. Behind them came 4 younger men, all carrying themselves with warrior discipline. Willa's first instinct was fear. 6 was more than necessary for a friendly visit. 6 was what you brought for enforcement, for justice. Had they changed their minds? Decided that a white woman near their territory was too dangerous to tolerate. But as they approached, she saw something that didn't fit the threat. The leader carried a bundle wrapped in leather, held carefully across his lap like it was precious. The old woman's expression wasn't hostile. It was assessing, curious, weighing. They stopped 10 feet from where Willis stood. The leader dismounted first, followed by the woman. The 4 younger warriors remained on their horses, watching but not threatening. The leader said something to the woman, who nodded and stepped forward. She spoke in halting English, her accent thick, but her words clear. Enough. I am Takakota. I speak between worlds. He wishes to speak with you. Through me. Willa nodded, relief flooding through her that she'd be able to understand. I am listening. The leader began speaking, his voice formal and carrying weight. Takakota translated, her eyes sharp on Willa's face. He is called Chayton. He leads his people. You saved his daughters when they were lost to the storm. You gave them shelter. You fought for their lives when sickness came. Willis stayed quiet, unsure if her response was expected yet. Chayton continued, and Takakota's translation followed. Among his people, a life dead is sacred. You could have left them to die. You could have harmed them. You did neither. You showed courage and kindness when you had every reason to show neither. He paused and his eyes locked onto Willis with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held her ground. In his world, Takakota continued. Such actions must be recognized, must be honored. To do less would shame his family and his people. Chayton carefully unwrapped the leather bundle. Inside was the most beautiful piece of work Willa had ever seen. A vest made of soft deer skin decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of blue, white, and deep red. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Each bead was perfectly placed, creating images of horses, mountains, and sky. He held it out to her, speaking again. Takakota translated, and her voice carried a note of something Willa couldn't quite identify. Respect maybe, or surprise. This was made by his wife, by his daughters, by the women of his family. Each bead placed with intention, each pattern carrying meaning. The blue for water that gives life, the white for snow that tested you, the red for the blood bond now shared between you and his family. Will's throat tightened. She reached out slowly, taking the vest with trembling hands. The leather was soft as breath. The beadwork even more, stunning up close. The weight of it felt like responsibility, like promise, like being seen in a way she hadn't been since before Emma died. This is not payment, Takakota said, her translation of Chayton's words firm. This is recognition. You are marked as friend to his people, as protector, as one who understands honor. Willow looked up at Chayton, words failing her completely. He watched her hold the vest, and something in his hard expression softened just slightly. He placed his hand over his heart again. That gesture she'd come to understand. Then he did something unexpected. He spoke directly to her in English, words clearly learned for this moment. You walk safe, our land, our people. We remember. It was protection, an offer of safety in a world where her skin color made her suspect, where living alone made her vulnerable, where kindness had once cost her everything. He was giving her safe passage through territory that could have been deadly, recognition that would spread through his tribe and beyond. But more than that, he was giving her belonging, a place in a world that had cast her out. Willa held the vest against her chest, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Chayton nodded once, a gesture of finality, and turned to mount his horse. But Takakota lingered, studying Willow with eyes that seemed to see past skin and bone into something deeper. You wear this, the old woman said, her voice low and serious. You wear this, and our young warriors will know you. They will not raise weapons. They will not question your presence on the land. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Further, but you must understand this is not just cloth and beads. This is covenant. This is binding. If you accept this, you accept responsibility. You are saying you stand with us, not against us, not neutral with us. Will's hands tightened on the vest. She understood what Takakota was really saying. Wearing this vest meant choosing a side. And if Ashford Ridge ever learned she'd been marked as a friend to the tribe, the hatred that had driven her out before would multiply tenfold. She'd be seen not just as a sympathizer, but as a traitor. She thought of Emma, of the doctor who refused to come, of the town that watched her daughter die and called it justice, of 3 years living alone, speaking to no one, trusting no one, expecting nothing. She looked at Chayton, sitting tall on his horse, waiting for her answer. She looked at the 4 warriors, young men who could have been her enemies, but were now offering her protection. She thought of Kim Mela's fierce loyalty, of Winona's small hand in hers, of the way they'd trusted her when they had every reason not to. Willow pulled the vest on over her shirt. It fit perfectly like it had been made specifically for her measurements. The weight of it settled across her shoulders, solid and real. I accept, she said clearly. I stand with you. Takakota's weathered face creased in two, something that might have been a smile. She spoke rapidly to Chayton in their language. He listened, then nodded once. Satisfied, he said something to the warriors, who all raised their right hands in a gesture Willa didn't recognize but understood. Acknowledgement, acceptance, witness. The group prepared to leave, but Dakota touched Willa's arm. One more thing. In 2 moons when the grass grows tall, there will be gathering, trade meeting between tribes. You come if you wish. You wear this. You come as family, as honor guest. The offer was stunning. Willa had heard of these gatherings, massive events where different tribes met to trade, to settle disputes, to celebrate. White settlers were never invited, never welcome. This was access to a world completely closed to people like her. I'll think about it, Willa said, her voice rough with emotion. Takakota patted her arm, a gesture that reminded Willa painfully of her own mother dead 10 years now. You think, but you come. You belong now is not common. Gift is rare, special. They mounted their horses and rode away, Chayton leading with the same quiet authority he'd arrived with. Willow watched until they disappeared completely, then looked down at the vest she wore. The beadwork caught the sunlight, colors bright against the soft leather. She walked back to her cabin and caught her reflection in the small mirror by the door. She looked different, not just the vest, but something in her face. The hardness had eased. The isolation had cracked. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere to someone again. That night, wearing the vest, even as she prepared for bed, Willa allowed herself to cry for the first time since Emma died. Not Tears of grief this time, but of release, of recognition, of being seen and valued by people who had no reason to see or value her. The carved stone sat on the table beside her, and now the vest hung nearby where she could reach it. Proof that her choice to save those girls hadn't been a mistake. Proof that kindness wasn't weakness. Proof that sometimes when you give everything expecting nothing, the world gives something back. But Willa knew the real test would come later. Word would spread about the vest, about what it meant. The tribe would talk about the white woman who saved the chief's daughters. And eventually that story would reach Ashford Ridge, would reach the settlers who'd cast her out, would reach men who saw the tribe as enemies and anyone who befriended them as traitors. The vest represented protection from one world, but it might paint a target on her back in another. Willow ran her fingers over the beadwork one more time, tracing the patterns of water and snow and blood. She'd made her choice when she pulled those girls from the storm. This vest just made that choice visible. She could live with that. She could live with being seen, with standing for something, with belonging to people who understood honor the way she did. Even if it cost her, even if it put her in danger. Because living alone and safe had been killing her slowly anyway. At least now, if danger came, it would find her, standing for something that mattered. The confrontation came 6 weeks after Chayton's visit. Willow was working in her garden when she heard horses approaching from the west, the direction of Ashford Ridge. 3 men. She recognized them immediately. Clayton Reeves led the group, the same man who'd organized her exile 3 years ago. Behind him rode 2 younger settlers, both carrying rifles across their saddles. Willis stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. She wasn't wearing the vest. It was too precious for daily work, but word had clearly reached them. Anyway, small communities talked. Traders passed through. Stories spread like fire through dry grass. Clayton stopped his horse 20 feet away, his face twisted with the same righteous anger he'd worn when he'd driven her out before. Heard something interesting, Willa. Heard the savages came calling. Heard they gave you something special. Will stayed quiet, measuring the situation. 3 armed men. Her rifle was inside the cabin, too far to reach before they could act if they chose to. See, that presents a problem, Clayton continued, his voice carrying false reasonableness. We tolerated you out here because you stayed away, kept to yourself, but now you're wearing their colors, standing with them. That makes you something worse than a sympathizer. That makes you a threat. One of the younger men spoke up, emboldened by Clayton's words. Town voted, you need to leave the territory completely. Go north. Go east. We don't care. But you don't get to stay here and aid the enemy. Will found her voice. They're not the enemy. They're people. And I saved 2 children from dying. That's all. That's all. Clayton's laugh was harsh. You think we don't know what that vest means? You've been marked as one of them. Given protection, access. You're a spy now, whether you planned it or not. The accusation was so absurd that Willa almost laughed, but she saw the genuine belief in their eyes, the fear masquerading as anger. These men truly saw her as dangerous, as corrupted, as something that needed to be removed. I'm leaving, Clayton said flatly. We all are selling our land and moving to the new settlements east where civilized people live. But we're not leaving you here to bring the tribe down on whoever buys our properties. You have 3 days to pack and go, and if I don't, Clayton's hand moved to the rifle. Then we come back and make you. The threat hung in the air between them. Willa calculated her options. She could fight, but she'd lose. She could run. But where would she go? This cabin was all she had left of her. Father, of Emma, of the life before everything fell apart. Before she could respond, she heard new horses coming fast from the north. Clayton heard them, too, his face going pale as he turned. 8 riders appeared from the treant. Chayton led them, with Takakota beside him and 6 warriors behind. They moved with purpose, but not aggression, positioning themselves in a loose line between Willa and the 3 settlers. Chayton didn't dismount. He didn't need to. His presence alone shifted everything. He spoke in his language, and Takakota translated her voice, carrying clearly. This woman is marked as friend. To our people, she is under our protection. Any threat to her is threat to us. Clayton's hand tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. He wasn't stupid. 3 men against 8 trained warriors was suicide. This is settler land, Clayton said, but his voice had lost its certainty. This is borderland, Takakota corrected. Agreed. Territory. She may stay. You may go. That is the peace we have maintained. That is the peace we will keep. One of the young warriors moved his horse forward slightly, not threatening, but ready. The message was clear. They would protect Willa with force if necessary. Clayton stared at Willa with pure hatred. You've chosen your side then. I chose it 3 years ago, Willa said quietly. When I spoke up for what was right, and your town punished me for it. This just makes it visible. Clayton jerked his reins, turning his horse. You'll regret this when they turn on you. When they decide you're not useful anymore, don't come crying to us. He rode off, the 2 younger men following. They disappeared back toward Ashford Ridge, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Chayton dismounted and approached Willa. He said something, and Takakota translated, You're safe. We will watch. They will not return. Thank you, Willa said, the words feeling inadequate for what had just happened. Chayton placed his hand over his heart one final time. Then he gestured to the north toward tribal lands and spoke. Again, Takakota translated, and something in her tone made Willa's throat tighten. He says, You do not need to live alone anymore. His people have decided. If you wish, you may build. On the border near their territory, you will have neighbors, protection, community. It was an offer of belonging. Real, tangible belonging. Willa looked at her cabin, at the land. Her father had claimed, at the isolation she'd wrapped around herself like armor. Then she looked at Chayton, at Takakota, at the warriors who'd come to stand between her and violence. I accept, she said. 3 months later, Willa's new cabin stood a mile from the main tribal settlement. It was larger than her old one, built with help from tribal members who'd brought supplies and labor. Kimala and Winona visited regularly, teaching her their language, while she taught them more English. The carved stone sat on her new mantle, and the vest hung where she could see it. Every morning, she wasn't alone anymore. She had purpose. She had people who saw her, who valued her, who stood with her. The town of Ashford Ridge eventually abandoned their properties and moved east, just as Clayton had promised. New settlers came, but they found an unusual situation. A white woman living peacefully among the tribe, marked as friend, protected, and valued. Some of them were curious, some were hostile, but none of them dared to threaten her because everyone knew what the vest meant. Everyone knew that touching her meant war with people who remembered debts and honored promises. Willa had saved 2 children from a storm. In return, she'd been given back her life. Not the life she'd lost, but something new, something better. A life built on honor, on mutual respect, on the simple truth that kindness creates bonds stronger than blood. She wore the vest often now, the beadwork catching sunlight, the colors bright against her skin. Every time she put it on, she remembered the moment she chose to save those girls. The moment that changed everything. The moment that taught her that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the gift they give back to you. Belonging, purpose, home. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and honor, click the video on your screen now for another powerful story from the frontier, where one choice changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat too. Support us in bringing more stories like this one.